they are announced. Also, Attorney General Eric Holder will be talking about the Supreme Court's decision on the Voting Rights Act. It's set to begin at 12:30 Eastern. We're planning live coverage of this on C-SPAN 2, again at 12:30 Eastern. The U.S. House is about to gavel in for the week. Following a period of general speeches, the chamber will recess until 5 to start legislative work on several infrastructure naming bills. Requests for recorded votes will be postponed until 6:30 Eastern. And now to live coverage of the U.S. House here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., June 25, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Carrie Bentivolio to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 1:50 p.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, for 5 minutes.
Thank the Chair. Last Thursday, Speaker Boehner called President Obama, quote, absolutely crazy, end quote, for moving forward with rules to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from power plants that cause global warming. What I think is absolutely crazy is the Republicans' constant denial of the overwhelming scientific consensus that climate change is real and human activity is largely responsible. I think it's absolutely crazy that the Republicans voted more than 50 times in the last Congress to block action on climate change. In March, I talked about a new peer-reviewed report from Oregon State and Hartford that looked at temperatures over the last 11,300 years. And they found that over the last 100 years, coinciding with the widespread use of fossil fuels and turbines, et cetera, that we have seen more temperature increase than over the previous 11,000 years. 100 years versus 11,000 years. Last month I came to the floor again, talk about a new NOAA report. Oceans are warming, fish stocks, many commercial fish stocks are moving north. Other things which aren't capable of moving are deteriorating in stocks. And then on the West Coast, we've had shellfish failures due to ocean acidification. And the shellfish, of course, are only an indication of what might happen to the rest of the food chain in the oceans. No one denies the acidification is due to the CO2 in the atmosphere. But the do-nothing Republican Congress just shrugs and says there's nothing to do. But unlike the Republicans, President Obama accepts the science, and in about 2 hours, the President will release a plan to combat climate change here at home and lay out steps for working with some of the world's largest polluters, including India and China, to reduce emissions abroad. The details aren't all out yet, but the President's proposing to do something that I said we should do 5 years ago. That is, use the regulatory powers of the Clean Air Act to regulate new and existing power plants. That's responsible for almost 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. We can make a huge dent in our emissions by moving forward on responsible, flexible efficiency standards for coal and natural gas plants. As the administration moves forward, it should take a close look at the climate plan outlined by the Natural Resources Defense Council. Their plan has 2 key elements: set state-specific emission rates to reflect the diversity of the nation's electricity sector, and give power plant operators broad flexibility to meet those standards in the most cost-effective way through a range of existing technologies. The standards for every state would be an overall emission rate average of all the fossil fuel plants, and individual plants could emit at a higher or lower rate. Each covered plant with an emission rate above the state standard can meet the target by retrofitting more efficient boiler, installing carbon capture, or it could burn a mixture of coal and cleaner fuels such as gas and or biomass. The plan would allow for the owners of multiple power plants to average emissions the rates of their plants and meet the required emission rate on average by running coal plants less often, increasing generation from cleaner sources, or integrating more renewable resources. Such an approach that is both flexible and state-based is exactly what makes the Clean Water Act one of our most successful environmental and public health statutes in history. Mr. Speaker, it's time to listen to scientists, get serious about climate change. The evidence is in. The President has a plan. The Supreme Court has given him the authority to regulate. The only question now is whether the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives will listen and act. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. America suffers from 4 consecutive trillion-dollar deficits and a $17 trillion debt that risk a debilitating American insolvency and bankruptcy. Financial responsibility is the key to minimizing America's risk of economic disaster wrought by crippling debt. Yet the Senate Gang of 8 amnesty bill is the height of financial irresponsibility. It makes illegal aliens a bigger financial burden on America, racks up higher deficits, and increases America's risk of insolvency and bankruptcy. The Senate Gang of 8 bill immediately gives illegal aliens state and local welfare. That is, in addition to the federal welfare illegal aliens already lawfully and unlawfully get. For example, watchdog group Judicial Watch reports that an assistant case manager in charge of food stamp applications stated, and I quote, "Illegals would come by the van load, and we were told to give them their stuff. Management knew very well they were illegal. It was so rampant that some employees would tell their illegal relatives to come and get food stamps." Judicial Watch adds, quote, "The promotion of the food stamp program, now known as SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, includes a Spanish language flyer provided to the Mexican Embassy by the United States Department of Agriculture with a statement advising Mexicans in the United States that they do not need to declare their immigration status in order to receive financial assistance." Judicial Watch goes further, and again, I quote, "The United States Department of Agriculture spent taxpayer money to run Spanish-language television ads encouraging illegal aliens to apply for government-financed food stamps. The Mexican consul in Santa Ana, California starred in United States government-financed TV commercials and assured illegal aliens that receiving food stamps, quote, won't affect your immigration status," end quote. Judicial Watch concluded that, quote, "Adding insult to injury, last spring the United States Department of Agriculture Inspector General revealed that many food stamp recipients use their welfare benefits to buy drugs, weapons, and other contraband from unscrupulous vendors, disclosing that the fraud has cost American taxpayers nearly $200 million. A comprehensive study by the Heritage Foundation found that, and again I quote, "Many unlawful immigrants have U.S.-born children. These children are currently eligible for the full range of government welfare and medical benefits." The study notes that, quote, "In 2010, the average unlawful immigrant household received around $24,721 in government benefits and services while paying some $10,334 in taxes. This generated an average annual fiscal deficit, benefits received minus taxes paid, of around $14,387 per household." The Heritage Foundation confirms that the Senate Gang of 8 amnesty bill will, quote, "After 13 years, unlawful immigrants would become eligible for means-tested welfare and Obamacare. At that point, or shortly thereafter, former unlawful immigrant households would likely begin to receive government benefits at the same rate as lawful immigrant households of the same education level. As a result, government spending and fiscal deficits would increase dramatically. The Senate Gang of 8 amnesty bill is reckless with the truth and misleads the American people. Not only will illegal immigration increase American taxpayer burdens through welfare, Obamacare, and other payouts, but illegal immigration is already costing United States taxpayers more than $14,000 a year per illegal alien household. All told, per the Federation of Americans for Immigration Reform, illegal aliens already cost American taxpayers roughly $100 billion per year in net tax losses. The Senate Gang of Eight amnesty bill does not properly manage welfare, does not give border security, mismanages tax dollars, thereby hammering already stressed and overtaxed American families and taxpayers while aggravating America's already bad financial situation, thus increasing America's risk of a debilitating insolvency and bankruptcy. Mr. Speaker, the Senate Gang of Eight bill must be defeated at all costs. America's future depends on it.
The gentleman yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. COURTNEY, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 5 days, unless Congress acts, the Stafford Student Loan Program, which helps 7.5 million students pay for college, is set to see its interest rates increase from 3.4% to 6.8%. Again, this is at a time when student loan debt now exceeds $1 trillion. It's the highest form of consumer debt in the economy, exceeds credit card debt, it exceeds car loan debt. And yet, despite the fact that, again, students and families are facing this mounting, crushing burden, unless we move in a very short period of time, we are going to add to that burden by allowing the interest rates to go from 3.4% to 6.8%. Again, 6 years ago, this Congress acted to pass the College Cost Reduction Act, which cut that rate from 6.8% to 3.4%. It was a 5-year bill tied to the Higher Education Reauthorization Act. Last year, with minutes to spare, we extended that lower rate for 1 additional year. And again, here we are today, 5 days away from this rate doubling. I've introduced legislation H.R. 1595, the Student Loan Protection Act, which has 196 members of the House who've signed a discharge petition demanding that the Speaker of the House bring this bill up for debate and passage, which will protect that lower rate for an additional 2 years. And we need that time so that we can pass a new Higher Education Authorization Act, which will deal with the broad range of issues that surround how we pay for college and access to higher education affordability, which includes, of course, the Stafford Student Loan Program, the workhorse for families to pay for college. It also deals with Pell Grants. It also deals with Perkins loans. It also deals with the obstructions and hurdles that people face when they want to refinance student loan debt after they've left college. Again, that's a big part of that $1 trillion debt burden that's out there in the society. We need a broad, long-range plan to pay for higher education because the stakes are huge. We know that the U.S. economy needs critical skills in our workforce if we are going to continue to grow and prosper. The baby boomers are now hitting retirement age at increasing numbers in a whole range of critical occupations from medicine to science, engineering. We need to refill the ranks, and higher education is the avenue that we can continue to succeed as a country and as a nation. Our competitors know this. They are investing in higher education at a much higher rate than we are in the U.S., and we must act to make sure that again, we don't go backwards on July 1st. Now, the House passed a bill on May 23rd. The Republican majority pushed a bill through, which they claim solves the problem. It changes the fixed rate loan program to an adjustable rate tied to the Treasury note, the 10-year Treasury notes, which is roughly now at about 2.6%. It adds an additional 2.5% to that, and they claimed when they passed that bill that that solves the problem. Unfortunately, the Congressional Budget Office drilled down deeper and analyzed what the real net impact would be on students. The problem with that variable rate program is that for a freshman entering this fall, a new student like my daughter who's starting college this fall, she doesn't use the Stafford Loan Program, but for some of her fellow students, if they sign up for the Stafford Loan Program under the Republican bill, they really don't know what the rate is because it will reset every year that that freshman is in college over a period of 4 years. Looking at where Treasury notes are projected over the next 4 years, the Congressional Budget Office has told us that, in fact, for that graduating student 4 years from now, their interest rate on the loan that they will graduate with will be over 7%. So in other words, as CBO told us, if we allow the Republican bill to go forward, it's actually worse than doing nothing and allowing the rates to double to 6.8%. President Obama has proposed a different version, which would, again, use the cheap cost of money today with a inflation add-on, but that plan that the President put forward locks in the rate for the student who takes that loan out next year. So in other words, that freshman that will go to school with my daughter next year, who signs up for a Stafford student loan program, their rate will not reset from 1 year to the next. They will have at least the protection of a fixed rate based on the calculation using the Treasury note baseline. It is a better proposal. The Republican bill has a cap in terms of how high these rates can go over time. The President's does not. We need, obviously, to get both sides to come together and come up with a real compromise which comes up with an affordable, sustainable way for the Stafford student loan program to work. With only 5 days to go, I would argue that the better course now is just protect the lower rate, give us some time to come up with, again, overlapping good ideas from both sides of the aisle to fix this problem. Let's not let the rates double. Let's pass H.R. 1595. Let's protect 7.5 million college students, pursue their goals and dreams, and help the U.S. economy. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, there is a civil war raging in Syria. No question about it, President Assad is a bad guy. He hates Israel and he hates his own people. And the humanitarian situation in Syria is dire. I have been to Syrian refugee camps in Turkey and seen firsthand the devastation of this war. One camp I went to, there were 150,000 Syrians in Turkey fleeing from this devastation of war. However, there are numerous rebel groups trying to remove Assad from power. Who exactly are these rebels? We really don't know, but we do know the most powerful among them is al-Nusra, an affiliate of al-Qaeda. These extremists are killing each other in the name of religion, and the people of Syria are caught in the middle. Lining up on President Assad's side are the nations of Russia and Iran, but also the terrorist group Hezbollah, of course, sponsored by Iran. Lining up on the so-called rebels' side are Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and numerous rebel groups from patriots to criminals to al-Qaeda and outside mercenaries. For 2 years, the United States has just ignored the situation. But now, suddenly, the administration has decided it's time to get involved. The administration's answer? Send the rebels American guns. Send the rebels American guns? Blindly traffic American guns into Syria and, I guess, hope for the best. This sounds familiar, Mr. Speaker? We've tried this before. We've seen this song and dance in Libya and even in Mexico, our neighbor. This administration is gun-happy to give guns away. In Libya, the administration armed the rebel groups to oust Omar Gaddafi, another bad guy. Well, where are those guns now? Were they used in Benghazi? Who knows? The administration is still silent on Benghazi. Those guns are scattered all over the Middle East and in North Africa. Were they used in Algeria? You remember, Mr. Speaker, in Algeria there were Americans working at an energy plant there, along with other citizens from other countries. 2 Americans were killed in that. Were they used in Mali? Who knows? Only time will tell. And who has died because these weapons end up in the wrong hands every time we give American guns away to rebel groups? By providing weapons to radical sectors fighting against Assad, we're really taking sides in somebody else's war. We're also arming some radicals who seek to destroy us, like al-Qaeda, who is fighting on the side of the rebels. More weapons will only escalate this conflict. More people are going to die because the United States picks sides. But Syria and Libya are not the first time this administration blindly trafficked weapons to terrorists. Let's go back to our own hemisphere. Let's talk about our neighbor Mexico. Do you remember Operation Fast and Furious? We still haven't gotten answers on that scandal. In an effort to help fight the drug cartels, the administration sent thousands of weapons to Mexico without even telling the Mexican government. And who got those weapons? The drug cartels. Of course, these guns ended up in the hands of the terrorists, the narco-terrorists, and resulted in the death of at least 2 or 3 Americans and hundreds of Mexican nationals. Another botched gun-running operation sponsored by the U.S. government. Too bad we don't learn from history and stop this nonsense of furnishing guns to groups in somebody else's country. Did we implement universal background checks on the violent criminals we armed in Syria, Libya, Mexico? Yeah, right. Is this the new policy of the United States? International weapons trafficking? Meanwhile, back at the ranch, this administration is on a tireless crusade to ban guns in the United States. Mr. Speaker, why is the White House so determined on disarming Americans while arming known potential terrorists, bandits, drug lords, and mercenaries? Ironic, don't you think? But that's a different issue for a different day. And I ask this question: what is the national security interest of the United States to be involved in Syria, in somebody else's civil war? There is none. This is not our war. Mr. Speaker, this is a regional religious war that we should not be involved in. It's a war between the Sunnis and the Shias. And these two religious groups have been fighting each other since the year 630. And now we're involved in this regional religious war. What's next? Is the administration going to propose and implement a no-fly zone? Well, if this occurs, I believe the President must ask for congressional approval on the War Powers Act. No question we should help with humanitarian aid. This is not our war. We should not be running guns to third world countries. We shall wait and see what happens. And that's just the way it is. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record part of the War Powers Act.
Without objection.
I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having traveled home this weekend and listened to so many back in my district, concerned about the lack of solutions and the lack of effort on behalf of the United States Congress to get things done. I told them to take heart, that sometimes these things are difficult. And I added, what if I could tell you that we could deal with the rising costs of health care? We could bring down the national debt and do it all by providing better quality and coordinated, patient-centered care. That would be a good goal, they surmised. And what if I told you we could do this without raising taxes or cutting Medicare benefits? And what if I told you that all of this notion began from the seeds of an idea that was outgrown from the Heritage Foundation, and it was piloted by a Republican governor in a Democratic state, and then served as the basis of the Affordable Health Care Act, which is the law of the land. The Affordable Health Care Act, in fact, what many members on my side of the aisle would have supported was something different: a single payer, a Medicare for all approach. But the law of the land is based on the Heritage Foundation idea and a Republican governors from Massachusetts formula for making sure that we could provide care to all of our citizens. Although the Health Care Act has become politically driven and charged, what the American people want to see is a Congress that's serious about solutions, solutions that are workable on behalf of the American people. So let's start where we all agree. Paul Ryan has stated over again very eloquently that the rising costs of our debt and deficit are due to health care. I agree with him. When it comes to making sure that quality of patients is improved and care is coordinated more effectively, these are not Republican or Democratic ideas. These are American ideas and why we need to move forward. We have no less than 10 separate studies from the Institute of Medicine, Reuters, the Commonwealth Fund, among others, that show that there is between $750 billion to $800 billion in waste, fraud, abuse, and lack of coordination within our health care system. Why, then, would we consider, with that kind of waste, taking any money out of Medicare or taking any money away from the beneficiaries who use that to pay their hospitals, their medical devices, their pharmacists, their doctors? What we need to do is face what the reality is. The reality is that the United States spends 18% of its gross domestic product on health care. We need to drive those costs down. And by doing so, as businessmen will tell you, any model that is that inefficient, when the rest of the world is at 8 and 9% for health care and provide universal access to health care, and we're at 18% with millions of our people still uninsured, if we drive that down and wring out all the inefficiencies, the waste in the system, then we can have both health care for our system and for our constituents that's both coordinated, that's essential, and drives down the national debt. All we have to do is recognize a simple fact. Take the very best of our public health system. Take the very best of science, technology, and innovation, and then take the very best of our private sector and its entrepreneurs, and have this body come together in a coordinated fashion to bring that about. It's happening without us. It's happening in the private sector, where leaders like Mark Bertolini from the Aetna and others around this country are taking steps to drive down the cost of health care. They're doing it by coordinating care with the Mayo Clinic, with the Cleveland Clinic, with Sloan Kettering, with labs like Jackson's Labs in my state. All of this is focused on making sure that we're going to have better outcomes for our people. We can do this together. Let's work towards solutions. This Congress is capable of doing it. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until 2 p.m. today.
So as you heard, the House is in recess until 2. They'll return again at 5 for legislative work on several infrastructure naming bills, votes at 6:30 Eastern. Later this week, members will debate several bills dealing with offshore oil drilling, including one dealing with drilling along the U.S.-Mexico border in the Gulf of Mexico. The Senate is also in today. Senators continuing work on immigration policy. You can see the Senate live on C-SPAN 2, the House live when they return at 2 p.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN.